Worldview-Agility podcast. Hello and welcome. My name is Carsten Ohrmann. Many thanks for tuning in. This episode is part of an entire series of conversations I'm having with fellow curators of the Galileo Commission. The mission and the goal of the Galileo Commission is to expand the scope of science. It's about catalyzing a currently ongoing scientific revolution which will result in reframing our existing knowledge on who and what we really are. I'm one of the curators of the Galileo Commission myself, and I admire my colleagues for taking the time to engage in a conscious conversation. In this episode, I speak to Edi Bilimoria. Edi presents a really unusual blend of experience in the fields of engineering, science, arts, and philosophy. He's very familiar with occult sciences and esoteric philosophy. We are speaking, amongst others, about extending the boundaries of scientific materialism without knocking on it, about infinite dimensions of consciousness, the responsibility of spiritual gurus, about mythology and symbolism, and about the quest for truth. We recorded that session on the 25th of March 2022. And now enjoy listening. Hey Edi.
Good morning, Carsten. How are you?
Hey, lovely to see you. I'm very well. How are you?
I am very well, and being very well is not an option in my book.
Okay.
A mandate. There is no other choice.
Yeah, you see, but I think this is where a lot of people actually would struggle. So what is your recommendation if it is not an option, if it is mandatory? So what do we need to do in order to be well?
Well, that's a multi-level question, Carsten. But from my perspective, I distinguish between pleasure and joy. So one can be downcast, one can be not depressed, but one can be under the weather, but one can still be joyous. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is one relates to the inner self and the other relates to the physical body and the physical surroundings. So in order to be well, I really think one has to live healthily on three levels, on body, soul, and spirit. Mm-hmm. And of course, the last comes first.
Mm-hmm. So would you therefore, I mean, I understand, or I think I get the distinction between pleasure sort of associated with the body and soul. That is the inner part, that is the joy.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think every artist will say that in the creation of their finest works, they shed no end of tears. It was a labor of love. Mm-hmm. And that labor of love is the efflorescence of the soul and spirit. The body might have been suffering a lot as a result of staying up all night and tearing, one's hair out.
Yes.
As indeed, I'm sure you would agree. I mean, you have a very creative website with the exponential graph going up and another one, the hyperbolic one, going down.
Yeah, that is about the difference between solving a problem, and developing potential.
Right. Let me move you onto my main screen just a sec so I can look at you. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. So the distinction here is really that you might start from a negative starting point. So where you have whatever problems, pain, whatever shape the problem actually manifests itself, right? But it's perceived as a negative, discomfortable kind of whatever situation, right?
Yes.
And then by solving the problem, you get into the norm, into the normal. So then the problem is gone and everything is just sort of okay, average. And that is what I mean with this one piece, right? And the other is really that you start from a neutral point, and then you develop potential. So it's so the normal state, the normative state, basically, is what distinguishes the work to solve problems from the work to develop potential. So I mean, this is just it's just a depiction. It's a very, very simplified way of showing it. But I just like the idea to talk about the fact that that working in consciousness related activities, let's just put it loosely like that for the moment, it basically serves both of the purposes. It can help solving problems, so it can help getting you out of a negative into sort of an average, into a neutral state. But if you then continue, you can also develop potential, which actually lifts you from a neutral stage much higher into more evolved stages. So that is, but thanks for looking it up. This is really
that's very interesting, and various languages. That's very good.
Yeah, I haven't put the effort into translating all of the content into both languages, right?
Yes.
So but yeah, there is a lot of content, and I've just bothered to take a first step to have an a reduced set of English language information there. What I find is that a lot of people actually go into the German part of the website, and they just Google translate it, and that is
right.
This is what's happening as well. And honestly, not a lot of people actually take the time to read through all of the stuff that is provided anyhow. Yeah, but this is really great. I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to speak, Eddie, because for me, this Curators meeting for the Galileo Commission was one of those events which I thoroughly enjoy, just because we have the opportunity to extend the network of like-minded people.
That's very important, to establish a strong nucleus, and that nucleus will grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I find it really amazing how these things evolve, right? I mean, it's like everywhere. I mean, it's a small world, but particularly when you start looking at the topic that we have on our agenda, right? It is a small world, and you find that there are people sort of in the environment, in the surroundings, and you happen to know one person, and that then knows another, but it's still sort of, you come across a number of familiar faces if you just dig deeper, right? I mean, if we would start to look into who do you know, who do I know, I would bet that we find a lot of similarities.
A lot. Yes, there are a lot of non-local connections, if I can put it that way.
So I'm really curious, Eddie, how did you come to where you are at that very moment? I mean, from what you do in your daily life, but also from your relation to the GC, to the Galileo Commission. Can you just help me sort of get your background a bit better?
Oh yes, certainly. How long do you want it? I'll be brief.
This is the challenge, right? Put a whole lifetime into a couple of minutes, right?
No. Well, first, let me establish some parameters. How long do we have today? I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm also fine. I mean, let me just check so that we are running, not really running into any problem. I have got maximum 2 hours. So we are now.
No, we'll need.
Yeah. So, but let's just see. So there is no time pressure, but at some point after 2 hours, I need to run into my other meeting.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, we've also got a Galileo thing, so make it less than that, and then I've got my choir practice after that.
Yeah, I heard about that as well. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let me start by saying this to you, Carsten. I think if someone said to me, what's the luckiest thing that ever happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I was born in the East and manufactured in the West.
Very nice. Yeah.
From Eastern ingredients. So what I mean is I'm totally happy and au fait with all cultures and all different approaches. So I was born in Bombay of the Parsi Zoroastrian, Zarathustrian, in that community.
Mm-hmm.
And I was brought up on, my parents brought me up on Aesop's fables, on Grimm's fairy tales, and on Lamb's tales for Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
I was not brought up, not that it existed, but thank goodness I was not brought up on doing that on a stupid mobile phone at a young age. My school was a Roman Catholic school, but very, very broad-minded. And besides lessons in the Bible, we studied the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And I'm talking of well before the age of 13.
Mm-hmm.
So that really exposed me to the wonderful mythology and the truth contained in allegory, in mythology, in myth, and in stories. Mm-hmm. Of course, I wouldn't put it in those words at that age. Mm-hmm. So then when we came to England, age of 13, my wonderful school in England, we had to memorize Polonius's statement, or rather his speech in Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is one of the finest character building phrases in Shakespeare. So what I'm trying to show is a very broad spectrum, a universality of approach, an understanding of the differences between various cultures, respecting the differences and seeing how those differences really contribute to an organic unity. Mm-hmm. My love in life has always been music, as you can see behind. Yeah. So I've maintained body, soul, and spirit. The body works or enjoys engineering and science, the soul, music, and when I say spirit, very loose terms, of course, I mean the esoteric philosophy. And I have always been drawn to the esoteric philosophy and the occult sciences, and, you know, written quite a bit on it. And I would say for that interest, you need a universal approach. Yeah. So my engineering was at Imperial College in Sussex, and then I did cultural studies in Oxford. And there's no way, and I must emphasize this, there's no way I'm knocking materialism or materialistic science. At the age of 14, it was medical materialism that saved both my eyes. Mm-hmm. And whenever people knock materialism, I say, look, this is nonsense. It has its place and it is indispensable. But scientific materialism will not answer to the deeper questions of consciousness and genius and the evil that goes on in this world and many other questions. Within boundaries, it is invaluable. But if you try and extend the boundaries, it gets ridiculous. Mm. And I've been with the Theosophical Society for well over 40 years, mm-hmm. with the Scientific Medical Network for, 30 years or whatever, when David invited me. And the Galileo Commission is an obvious entree to extending the boundaries of scientific materialism, not knocking it, but extending the boundaries of science, using scientific principles, but raising science to a higher metaphysic.
Yes, I think this is so important, because a lot of people actually I don't know whether they are afraid or whether they just assume that if one comes along and talks about non-materialistic existence or whatsoever, that they assume that we are neglect all of the findings in the materialistic existence, right? And
Yeah.
I think your point is so true. The way I like to describe it is that it's a sort of a non-materialistic extension of the materialistic insight, right?
Yeah.
So we basically expand it, as you say, right? We extend it, but this is almost like a natural scientific process anyhow, right? I think we have always sort of grown our understanding of our environment, right?
Absolutely. And there is a tremendous fear behind it, as you rightly say. A fear of all sorts of things, fear of losing your job and not getting your Nobel Prize or whatever, also fear of protecting your ego, of losing your ego, which is a fiction anyway.
You see, this is interesting because I don't know whether this makes sense, but it once dawned to me that the ego as such, or egocentric behavior or egocentric thinking as such, isn't really the problem. And that sounds provocative, but the real problem, from my point of view, is our limited understanding of our own identity. So,
yes, it is self-enclosure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
which then erects these artificial boundaries. Yes.
Yes. And as you say, these are artificial boundaries. I mean, from my point of view, these are sort of perceptional thresholds, right? But only perceptional thresholds.
Yes. Only perceptional.
Yeah.
From a slightly more, scientific perspective, if one looks at it in terms of increasing dimensions, what's your favorite book? Just any book, just say it, or music or anything.
I like Beethoven.
Oh, well, yeah, I know. Of course. Well, no, let's say Beethoven sonatas.
Yeah.
Say this is a book of Beethoven sonatas, which it isn't, of course, but say that's a small book of Beethoven sonatas. Now, if one operates in one dimension, one's like a bug. You can crawl along the surface, but you don't see any more dimensions, so you fall off. If you see 2 dimensions, you see the plane surface. If you see 3 dimensions, see the book. Now, if you see further dimensions, you look into the notes, you open and you see the notes. Now, all the dimensions were always there, but your limited vision couldn't access them.
Yes.
But when you mention Beethoven, the Beethoven sonatas, it has infinite dimensions, depending on how many dimensions of consciousness that we can access.
Yeah.
So in terms of perception, let's think in terms of lots of dimensions that are wrapped in, that are implicate, that need to be unfolded and explicated. Because otherwise, if you tell people, your perceptions are limited and all, you just sort of obviously put their backs up.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult to just sort of tell someone your perspective is limited, right? Or
yeah, you never say that.
That is sort of, this is how to communicate and how to interact with people. The other is more like to describe the challenges that we experience, right? To describe really the underlying mechanisms that there is a sort of a perceptual threshold, that we don't necessarily see all of the dimensions, or that we should expand our insight or whatever. I think I personally believe that it's a non-judgmental kind of call anyhow here, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
for me, it's not about some people are more advanced or better in quotation marks, right? Because they have got a broader insight into other dimensions. Because from a bigger point of view, I think we need all of those different scales and different scopes of insights, I think, for the entire mechanism to work, right? If we would all be enlightened, that wouldn't work either, right? Because then there would be no experience.
There'd be no contrast either. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another way of looking, and one can only use allegories and metaphors, because one is talking of something that is ineffable, but one can walk around it. And the other example is the difference between a parochial perspective and a global perspective. And I think Leopold Enfield, who was a Cambridge fellow and a close friend of Einstein, gave the the example of a universal perspective by quoting Einstein, actually, who said, and I'm paraphrasing it, that the truth needed for what is apparently true can be perceived by science. I'm paraphrasing. But the real truth, real italicized, the real truth is only known to the universal observer. Now, what's the universal observer? And he gives this example. We all know in ordinary physics that if you have a metallic sphere that's charged, electrically charged, it has no magnetic field, it's not moving. It's only when you move the conductor, it generates a magnetic field, hence electricity. So say this is my charged metallic sphere, which is static on Earth. But if someone on another planet extends his probe, he is seeing it moving. So does it have a magnetic field or does it not? And the answer is indeterminate, because the truth is only known to the universal observer, as a small example. So the greater, the wider one's vision, the more clearly one sees aspects of truth that are normally hidden. And that applies in any situation.
Yes. So would you consider this being a useful ambition to see more and more, to get more and more insight, to grow your perception? Is this something where you would welcome the ambition to do so, or would you basically say no, we should just leave it as it is?
The answer is, if you can handle what you see, because I think there's no shortage of people who are trying to access what they regard as the psychic world, which they call spiritual, and get into a lot of trouble because there are, for want of a better word, unseen entities that they would be accessing that they would not normally see. And if you were not overwhelmed, then good luck to you. So I would say my ambition's a strong word, but aspiration,
aspiration
would be only to see, well, always to keep seeing further, but to seeing further what can be handled and what can be usefully worked with. There's no end of, it's unhelpful things that one can see. So the further one sees, the more one's vision has to be purified.
Yes. and the more stable and the more sort of insightful that person would need to be, right, in order
Yes,
to deal with
yes,
that
yes,
insight. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, this is interesting because it reminds me. I mean, I have a similar kind of background in engineering and so on, and but I also obviously over the years get more and more interested in this whole new paradigm, in this whole way of thinking about consciousness and this universal consciousness and the universal observer and all these kind of things. And what you've just said about sort of entities which are sort of not perceived usually, but they do exist, and they have got different qualities and so on. This just reminds me of a shamanic education I've been going through, where which is in the tradition of the Quero shamans in Peru, in Latin America, and I'm not suggesting, I don't want to sort of claim that I know all of the kind of things that they do, but it's just that I've started to sort of learn along these lines. But the interesting thing in this context is that you learn, they can actually teach, or they know messages, methods basically to deal with these entities, right?
Yes, yes, that is absolutely so. There is a support structure, and there are ways of protection.
Yes.
That these people who have studied and mastered these things know about. But, you know, for anyone just trying to break into these unseen realms on their own, unprotected and unguided, is, in my opinion, very foolish.
Yes, and I think here we run into a really sort of almost dangerous situation, because there are, it's almost a hype that people learn techniques and tools to open these gates slightly further, right? Probably not entirely, but a lot of so-called gurus are around who basically try to show people how to enter these realms, and but I don't think that they necessarily prepare the people with all of the security procedures, if you would want to call it this way.
I couldn't care. I couldn't agree with you more. They couldn't care less about it almost. I despair if you see adverts, you know, for weekend Kundalini raising and chakra development courses, which is highly irresponsible and extremely dangerous, in my opinion. Of course, many people won't be so affected, but there are sensitive people who will be.
Yeah, and I don't know. I perceive a lack of responsibility on the side of those who offer these kind of tools, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lack of responsibility, a yearning for power, a yearning for recognition. And a lot of these people, Carsten, they have a certain charisma. And young people, I hate to say, especially a lot of teenage girls who are drawn to this sort of guru figure, are just drawn into their aura and get sucked in. And a lot of them are used and abused.
Yeah, this is really this is a sad part of it. I mean, this just reminds me of me being at the Kumbh Mela. You're obviously familiar with the Kumbh Mela, right? In India, these Hindu gatherings, these big Hindu gatherings, which happen every 4 years. And I was in Ujjain at the Kumbh Mela, and I was invited to speak there. And there were a number of other sort of presenters and speakers there. And the vast majority of them have been so-called gurus, right? Teachers, spiritual teachers. And what struck me there, and I've got a lot of respect for this body of knowledge, but what struck me there is the level of competition amongst those people.
Yes.
I mean, and that is what I couldn't grasp, actually. I mean, I was literally surprised, if not even shocked, about that, because if one teaches unity and then behaves in the most absolutely different, in the most
well, then it's just totally insincere.
And that is what I don't, this is what I don't get, right? I mean, what I don't understand, I mean, don't they understand what they preach, or do they understand what they preach and deliberately sort of behave differently? Or is there a temptation to basically say, okay, I know more than you, so there is a sort of a hierarchical kind of thing, and I can create dependencies out of that. So that is what I still don't know, honestly. I haven't found an answer to that.
I think a lot of people who start like that initially are fairly sincere in their approach. And they do have a little bit more knowledge, for want of a better word, than their audience, for want of a better word. But then the problem is, let's start from the step by step. You have a little bit more knowledge than someone else. You're invited to give a talk, and you have a gift of the gab, and you give a good talk. So then you're regarded as the expert, and then someone else asks you, and then your audience grows, and then you're the bigger expert and the bigger expert. And then the ego slowly comes in and says, I am the expert. I'm putting it very simplistically. Whereas the real expert, and there's no such thing, would always be self-examining and saying, do I really know it? Am I really quoting books? Is it really secondhand? Why am I doing it? Is it the satisfaction of looking at these starry-eyed boys and girls looking at me? And this is where I think Krishnamurti's message is central when he blasted away all the false gurus. I think it's a great mistake to think that Krishnamurti castigated all teachings. No, he didn't. He castigated the false gurus. And left the perfume of the teaching. So I don't think it's black and white, but if you take music as a prime example, there is obviously competition amongst instrumentalists. My gosh, there's competition to win the prize. But every musician will go down on his knees to Bach and Beethoven and Schumann and Chopin, Liszt and Schubert and the great composers. So what unites them is the music, and they're acutely aware and very humble about their dedication to the music. Now, these people you talk about, the ego has become the object of dedication. Or the subject.
This is true, and this just reminds me, there was one of those speakers there who also was from India, also a guru type guy, but he spoke exactly about what you've just summarized so nicely, that that the real challenge here is not to be consumed by the fact that you know slightly more, or apparently seem to know slightly more, and then misuse it. So that exactly that what you said, that the ego then kicks in, right? So the temptation actually gets so big that most of the people can't stand it, right? Interesting, because that is the path of sort of a sort of a guru who basically takes the satisfaction from the status of being regarded as a guru, right? And the other thing is sort of like the self-help kind of thing, where I think the true teachers would probably not generate any kind of dependencies.
No, the true teacher is the one who wants to kick you out and say, you don't need me anymore.
Yes.
Well, the false teacher will grab hold of you.
Yeah. Yes.
The true teacher makes you independent of the teacher.
Yes. Yes. And I don't know. I mean, this is probably an unfair question, but this is just to get a feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, if you consider the totality of all of the teachers around, so the true and the false teachers, right?
Mm.
What is the percentage, you think, of true teachers?
Small.
Very small, right?
Small.
Yeah.
But the false teachers are not 100% false.
Yeah.
One can at least hear the words and apply them, even though they may not be.
And this is interesting as well, because this is the application of the words and not just the plain taking them on. I mean, this is like you are invited to reflect
Yes.
truth that you get presented, and or the information that you get presented, and then consider whether this is part of your truth or not, right? And I think we see that a lot of people actually just blindly follow whatever someone says, right?
Yes.
And that is not just with the gurus.
Yeah, it's blindly following, which is a huge gateway to perdition and to doom.
Yes.
And again, Krishnamurti's great message is do not follow authority, do not question it. No, do not follow authority doesn't mean you become an anarchist. And that's the trouble. People stupidly just go the other way. Questioning, one of my favorite sayings is doubt is the humble servant of truth.
Oh, lovely. Doubt is the humble servant of truth.
Yeah,
That's
but
lovely.
what kind of doubt? It's not, oh, you stupid idiot, prove it. How do you know? Prove it. Doubt meaning the questioning approach. And was it Socrates, wasn't it? I think, who said the philosopher is not just the wise one who goes around saying, I'm so wise, but he who is questioning and trying to understand the limits of his own understanding.
Yes.
So it's the questioning approach, which is really what's driven science. If science weren't questioning, we wouldn't get beyond classical physics.
Absolutely. And I see another metaphor here, or another aspect from the world of business, which you also will be familiar with, because there, if you enter into a bigger transaction, or if you do a bigger investment, there comes a phase of what we call in business due diligence.
Due diligence is a huge word in my field, yes.
Yeah, and I think that is what we are talking about, because there is a certain necessity to become diligent with regards to reflecting our own understanding and what we know and what we don't know.
Diligence with what we know or think we know and what we've been given.
Yes. And that then reminds me that that is probably what we need to teach people. It's not the content. I think it's the diligence, it's the ability to question, really, and to be doubtful and to sort of challenge things, and not in its own rights, or on its own rights, but just really in order to progress, in order to not stand still.
Yes. Yes, the questioning approach handles sensitively, because questioning comes across as adversarial, and it isn't.
Yes.
Or it needn't be, of course.
Yes. I think this is a good point. It's not that I'm against something if I'm doubtful, right? There is space. There is space in between.
Yes, the truth, if you like, lies not in two poles, but in the tension, in the dynamic tension between apparently opposing points of view. The points of view are only opposing apparently, because each point of view has its contrast.
Yes.
And the truth is the spark or the tension that lies in these apparently opposing points of view, which is really the mark of a man who has achieved some wisdom.
And there is this model which I sometimes use in my coachings and programs of this thesis, and then the antithesis, and then this
yes.
synthesis, right?
Synthesis, yes. That's a very good one.
Because that, and it's almost like the synthesis is a kind of that's another additional dimension, if we would want to throw that one back in, right?
A dynamic tension.
Yeah.
It's not a static compromise, or an average of the two.
Yes. It's a more integrative kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that is what we are probably missing, or to turn it around, what we probably need to sort of embrace more, right? To see the synergy between or in these contradictory kind of polarities, and to understand from a different perspective, from a higher dimension, or however, to understand how it all seamlessly fits together, right? And that there is this standpoint that it actually all makes sense, even if it looks contradictory.
Yes. Even if it looks contradictory.
This is, you see, and bringing this back to this pending paradigm shift, I think we are just, I don't know what your take is, but I would assume that you agree, that we are in a pending situation with regards to a new scientific revolution, according to sort of that concept, and that these findings that we are discussing in the sort of Galileo Commission and this new kind of insights, that this again sort of fuels our ambition to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. But on the other hand, I think we need to be really careful in how to communicate that, because a lot of people won't get it.
Carsten, you said it, communication.
Yes.
Because you've only got to say the wrong thing at the wrong moment, and some powerful scientist will rubbish it, and because of his power, it's rubbish. And I think the example that comes to mind is Robert Oppenheimer and David Bohm, his pupil in Los Alamos, I think. And they disagreed on the interpretations of quantum theory, which is fine. But Oppenheimer's directive was, if we cannot disprove Bohm, we must ignore him. How scientific is that? And that blighted David Bohm, the great David Bohm's career. Now take another example. Einstein and Max Born, they disagreed over quantum theory all their life. But whenever they met, they played the Beethoven violin sonatas. So this is where disagreements handled with maturity can enhance a friendship. So communication is absolutely vital. But I mean, how does one learn that art? If one doesn't take risks, nothing happens.
That's a good point.
But what I've noticed and seen more and more, Carsten, is evidence doesn't mean a damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
When people's minds are closed, evidence doesn't mean a thing.
So is this a rather absolute in quotation mark statement? I mean, or is it just still not enough evidence? So if the amount of evidence would grow and grow and grow, do you think at some point there is a kind of critical amount of
critical mass? Well, if the amount of evidence grows and grows and grows, then the people are going to say, well, if 1,000 million people believe in reincarnation, then it must be true. From that standpoint.
Which?
Let me tell you that famous experiment by Arthur Ellison. You know Arthur Ellison?
Yeah.
Well, okay, yeah, I don't need to tell you about him then.
But it might still be interested to just share it in the communication. So that is.
Oh right, yeah, I knew Arthur. I was very privileged to know him through the Theosophical Society.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh, well over a quarter of a century. And besides being, he was professor at City University and a visiting professor at MIT. He was 3 times president of the Society for Psychical Research.
Mm-hmm.
And he conducted a famous experiment at London University. He was giving a talk to an audience on loosely paranormal subjects. And he suggested to the audience that I've got a flower pot on my table to make it look pretty. Let's try and elevate the flower pot by chanting Om, because Om's a sacred word.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when I snap my fingers, chant Om, see what happens. So he snapped his fingers, the audience chanted Om, and the flower pot levitated quite a few inches, hovered in the air, and crashed down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's behind it? Before the experiment, Arthur Ellison arranged for a physics professor to be looking close and a psychic lady. The physics professor said, I saw nothing, and turned on his heels and left the hall. The psychic lady saw ectoplasm
Mm-hmm.
lifting the bowl,
Mm-hmm.
and also lifting the laboratory table. She saw that. Now, what did Arthur actually do? It was a very light flower pot, and under that he had an electromagnetic buzzer. Mm-hmm. And a metal plate. When he snapped his fingers, his technician peering through the crack through the door turned on the switch. Mm-hmm. And turned on the buzzer. And it did levitate electromagnetically. Yeah. And the whole point of chanting Om was so that the audience would not hear the sound of the buzzer. Yeah. What's the story? Your paradigm will determine what you see.
Absolutely.
The physics professor, levitation, load of rubbish, left. The psychic lady, ectoplasm, lifting the bowl. Yeah. So they both had their evidence, but they saw the evidence in very different ways.
Yes. I think if we would apply that to the interpretation of apparent evidence, right, it would probably allow more room to interpret things also from a different angle.
Because in the medical profession, the Western allopathic dyed in the wool would say, load of rubbish, no evidence for homeopathy.
Yes.
And I have discussed this with well-known doctors. And if I say there is a hospital in Delhi that are actually filming and recording their clinical trials, I'm not interested in that evidence. Really? And it goes on like that.
Yeah. So the degree and the level of acceptance, how can, I mean, what is this degree? What kind of function is it? I mean, what are the variables that determine that degree of acceptance? Or, I mean,
one thing is hard experience, of course.
mm-hmm.
If you've experienced something, you don't need more evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've really experienced a life-threatening disease that was cured, say, by acupuncture, homeopathy,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need further evidence. You are the evidence.
Yes.
So experience is the main one. So the other one is, of course, an unimpeachable quest for truth.
Yes.
And an ability to recognize your concepts and put them aside.
Yes. So this is this jhana yoga kind of thing, right?
Yes, it is jhana yoga, if you like. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing because I talk to so many people, and what you've just described seems to be so true. A lot of them actually got convinced only in the moment when they had a moment of awakening or spiritual experience or whatsoever. And the reason why I'm so puzzled by that is that I would probably consider myself not falling into this group of having had such sort of a unusual experience. Whereby it is debatable what is unusual.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Quite.
Yeah. But I would probably consider myself not falling into this group of having had any kind of experience. But I still think that this path of knowledge, that truth finding, being doubtful, challenging, due diligence approach, whatever you would want to label it, right? That
due diligence is very important. It's being protective.
Yes.
Almost maternally protective towards truth, which is very fragile.
Yeah. Yeah. So I find it amazing, actually, that the dependency of the experience. I mean, I'm a very much sort of intellectual, sort of rational kind of person, at least initially. That was my kind of educational background, right? And on that journey, I found myself in a sort of dilemma, because at one part on my personal journey, I found that my intellect basically pointed me into whatever direction being true, like, okay, pointed me south. So my intellect says south is true. And my emotional kind of feelings actually pointed me into the opposite direction. This pointed me into, no, north is true. And that was a dilemma for quite a while, right? But I can't even tell how this has been solved, and I don't know whether it is entirely solved at all, but at least I don't perceive that huge dilemma anymore. But I know that I had that moment, or this period where I felt like, okay, can I really trust my intellect?
Well, here you're bringing in the wonderful Ian McGilchrist insights into the divided brain and the master and the emissary. And interestingly, what Ian McGilchrist has done has put a wonderful psychological, psychiatric, scientific, and neurological proof, almost indictment, of one of the most oldest ancient wisdom sayings, is that the mind, the brain, intellect will only get you so far. And intellect really destroys truth if you try and take it further. Because it is in the nature of intellect to make conceptual models. Well, conceptual models are fine, but the model's not the real thing. It is a model.
Yeah.
So another avenue is to try and show to people that trying to fight what is beyond intellect through intellect will get you nowhere. And one good example is Steven Weinberg, you know, the great Nobel cosmologist, recently died, who is famous saying that the more we understand the universe, the more it seems pointless. Well, it's pointless if you look at it through your intellect. There are many things, and the more you try and refine notions of God and divinity, the more it seems pointless. You can't approach God, divinity, purpose purely through intellect. It'll only get you so far. It's necessary, but intuition has to then take over.
So I think this is a really important point here. So what you're saying, and I totally buy into this, is I have this picture of you need to change the train, right? The first train you basically hop on.
That's a very good one. I like it. I'm going to make a note. Yes, go on.
Yeah, so you first hop onto the train, the intellectual train, right? And it
Yeah.
sort of only gets you to wherever, sort of King's Cross station, and in King's Cross.
Yeah, I'm listening.
King's Cross, you then need to onboard the whatever kind of experiential train, right?
Yes. Right. Yeah. Yes, that's a good one. Yeah. Or to look at it in the master and in his emissary terms, the right brain, and I think the only danger with Ian McGilchrist's teaching, and is that people will look at left brain and right brain as two separate compartments. He's not saying that. He's not saying that. The brain is holistic, but it's not. The left brain is the usual to do with language and concept, and the right brain music and feeling. But it's not the what they do, but the how they do and the why they do it, which is where the variation lies. And the right brain is looking at things in a holistic way, and the left brain needs to then come in and bring it down to brass tacks, so to speak. I'm putting it very, very simplistically, of course.
Yeah, and vice versa, isn't it? Because the right brain also pulls us out of the left brain hemisphere, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So isn't this then about sort of striking the right balance, actually?
It's absolutely about striking the right balance, depending on the context.
Yes.
Context is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to use the stupid analogy. If the wheels of your car fall off, well, there are lots of reasons. There is a material reason. The wheel wasn't properly manufactured, but the materials could be perfect. It wasn't screwed on properly. There was a human reason. And there is another reason. The driver was drunk and took the corner too fast. So merely taking the wheel off is not solving the problem of the drunken driver. So merely putting a materialistic patch on a problem that is beyond materialism is only patching the problem and not dealing with the problem.
Yes.
So context is absolutely vital. As I said, my own eyes, a corneal problem, a material breakdown, contact lenses.
Yeah. And this context probably also, I mean, I'm still thinking about this communication effort and how to communicate about those
Yes, yeah.
kind of topics, right? But the context can also be an opportunity here if we can combine the right communication, a context-sensitive communication, I think I'm talking about, right?
Yes, yes.
And the context is basically what usually the audience, if I may loosely call it audience, the sort of the receiving sides, they sit in a certain context. So if we actually find the right communication which fits the contextual environment of the audience, I think then there is an opportunity to convey it.
And it's usually a diverse audience.
And that is, you see, this is
that's the problem.
That is the biggest problem. You won't believe it. It's just before we started our conversation, I had another conversation with a German friend of mine. And we were talking exactly about that, because as soon as the audience is in terms of numbers bigger than one, and if it is so big that you can't actually manage understanding the entire audience in front of you, so if it is more than 5 or whatever, I mean, then it's getting really tough, because you don't know the context of each of the people, right?
So then you have two choices: to drop it down to the lowest common denominator and use the most simple words, or go to the highest common factor and you touch 3 or 4 and lose the rest.
This is so true. That explains basically why I am so, I use the word confident, why I am feeling absolutely fine talking about those things in one-to-one conversations.
That's why I really value our meeting.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, Carsten, to the multitude he spoke in parables. To his disciples he communicated deep truths. So to the multitude you have to resort to parables or such kind.
The trains, right?
The train.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there is another aspect which probably, I don't know whether this stems from an egocentric kind of source or not, but there is this, to stand the apparent implication that not everyone will get it. Right? To actually be fine with what you said. You go to the highest thing and then you only touch one, or you only 1 or 2 will receive it, right? So that degree of, I mean, you see, there is this marketing background sort of.
That's important. Important.
So it's really to find the best kind of, the optimal kind of balance between sort of good content,
stretching people.
Stretching people, right? But also accepting that you won't reach everyone, right? And so it's really, for me, it's a dilemma which I tend to solve by only having one-to-one conversations.
Much better.
And this now sort of closes the loop here as well, with regards to why I actually like them being recorded, right? Because by recording them, there might be a very, very small chance that some other person actually just stumbles across the content and finds it useful. Right?
But who will be listening to the recording?
I've got no idea. I've got no idea. And this is actually where I'm, you see, let me share with you how I basically came to this idea. You mentioned Jiddu Krishnamurti, obviously, right? And I personally have listened to a lot of talks that have been recorded, and I think we are blessed that those sort of more contemporary kind of wise people
were recorded.
Right? And there are others like Alan Watts or whatever.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So and I really appreciate that, right? And there is a there is another person which has walked on this planet here before, and that is Sri Aurobindo.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, so and you know
I'll
that
tell you about him later. Go on, go
yeah,
on.
but you know if you know Sri Aurobindo, you know that he has basically at some point he has started to communicate in letters, right?
Yes.
So all of his kind of all of the responses that he, or all of the wisdom that he has shared it in a way that it is documented, right? So we have these letters which are really sort of, they are true, they come from the source, they are not conveyed like the Bible and edited and edited and edited.
Yes, yes.
So you have got
first hand
kind of documentation, right? And either you do it in a way of letters, which is fine, but now I think we have sort of evolved a bit further, and now we do it in terms of either tape recording or video recording or whatever, right?
Sure, that's great.
And but I don't necessarily think that a Sri Aurobindo or that a Jiddu Krishnamurti had an intention to basically record it, and in order for it to serve a dedicated purpose, right? I think they have just sort of it got recorded. So,
Yes.
and that is the attitude that I feel really with these conscious conversations. I mean, I don't know whether I actually shared this explicitly when we spoke about this in the curators group, but the way I look at these conscious conversations, it's just that I find these conscious conversations, it's almost like a co-created space, which sort of allows things to develop, which I would never think about on my own, right? So it's really, for me, it's like a sort of it triggers me, and I think it's a co-creative kind of almost inspiring, and so if not even channeling kind of environment that gets created here, right? So I found it extremely, I learned to appreciate these conscious conversations so much that I always felt bad for having had a conversation which was not recorded. So I started to ask for permission if I may record.
Oh yeah.
Right. And then basically I piled up this whole number of sort of hours. I mean, we are talking hundreds, thousands of hours of recorded material, right?
Audio recorded.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's audio or video recorded, right? But there was never the intention to do something with that other than allowing me the opportunity, if I'm getting desperate, to just sort of revisit these conversations, right? So it was more like for me, but now I feel like, okay, with this idea of that podcast, I just think that making them available for those who want to sort of look at it or listen to this, I think that is my intention, and that is probably where podcast is the wrong term, because podcast often is associated with the idea of we need to reach a certain target group and we need to have a certain number of followers and so on and so on. So all of that kind of marketing and getting reach kind of thing, and pushing that is not what I mean. I would still be very happy if a lot of people would be interested in listening to these type of conversations, right? But I'm also a realist and realistic about the fact that it's probably not the majority of the society that will enjoy listening to the conversations that you and I are having.
Yeah, I think yes, you have a good point there.
Yeah, but still, to make it available.
To make it available is wonderful, because it's available when needed. And who knows, there might be a morphogenetic field associated. No, I'm not being facetious there. I mean,
true.
Because there are lots of things we don't know, and there might, well, if the intention is right, it'll go where it's needed. But you're talking of Aurobindo. In my bedroom, I have a calendar on which the mother, Aurobindo's great pupil, has written the words and given to me by my aunt, who used to go to the ashram regularly.
Really?
And the words written by the mother are, always remain young, never cease striving towards perfection.
Which is the due diligence message, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Striving towards, I mean, never get it, how boring if you do.
Yeah.
But it's like your website graph, it's an asymptote.
Yes.
And the asymptote, you know, you get closer and closer to the axis without ever touching it.
Yes. Yes. Have you ever been to Pondicherry and to Auroville?
Yeah.
Have you been to the Madre Mandir?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Pondicherry?
In Auroville, the Madre Mandir.
In Auroville, in Madura, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I went there when I was last in Adyar at the headquarters of the Theosophical Society.
Yeah.
And I went there and I spent a few days in Ramana Maharshi's ashram, and then I went to Pondicherry.
Yeah. It's many years ago now that I've basically been to Pondicherry, but I can't even recall. There is also a scientific kind of society associated with the ashram. I would need to look at it, but you know what I mean, right? So
yeah.
And I found it really interesting. Actually, talking about sort of awakening moments, right? I had a bit of a really unusual kind of moment when I was in Auroville. And you probably know that there is this visitor center, and then there is the Madre Mandir, this sort of meditation hall. But there is this what they call the quiet zone around this Madre Mandir, right? And so the visitor center is sort of at the outer edges of this quiet zone, and then you can either walk towards the Madre Mandir in order to get in, or you can walk to a point from which you can actually have a look at the Madre Mandir, right? And that is a nice, it's almost like a fairy tale kind of forest environment, right? And I was just, I don't know why, because there were a lot of people around, but I had the feeling that I was walking on my own, really. So I was walking from that visitors welcome center towards that point from which you can actually see the Madre Mandir. And that is a very nice path, a lovely kind of environment.
Walking in bare feet, of course.
Yeah. So and there are signs of Sri Aurobindo's teachings, always like some sentences and some explanations of this pathway, right? So I was really taking time to sort of make my way there. And then whilst I was sort of, I don't know, halfway there, I recognized that there was a particularly beautiful / interesting, whatever, sort of tree, which was not really at the footpath, but it was sort of a couple of meters into the forest. So I don't know why, but I then sort of left the footpath and walked towards that tree. And again, I don't know why, but I touched the tree, the trunk of the tree, with my right hand. So I was sort of standing there, but then I felt that it felt like electrical current, right? Sort of coming from the tree into my hand, through my right arm, through my body, into my left arm. And then I felt that this energy, if I might call it, actually sort of left my left hand and sort of was flowing into the ground.
Into the earth, yes.
And that is one of those few but really sort of moments that I thoroughly remember, where I recognized some sort of energetic kind of phenomena, which, at least to me, have been and are still very unusual, right?
Yes.
But I have had the opportunity to sort of experience these kind of things.
And the sort of thing you can never prove, convince, demonstrate, argue with someone else.
Or repeat.
Or repeat, until they have experienced it.
Yes.
Or they have sensitivity to understand what you're saying through their own life experience.
Yes. Yes. And because of that, because it's not repeatable, basically, that's the escape route for a lot of people to then call it non-scientific.
Yes, this repeatability thing is a very double-edged sword. It is highly important in its context, but completely ridiculous out of context, because in a sense, nothing is repeatable, because the whole universe has changed a bit. So in order to repeat it, you're going to have all the same parameters. So a physical experiment, you can keep the physical parameters, but a parapsychological experiment where there's so many variables, you can't possibly reproduce those parameters that existed some time ago.
Yeah, and I think this is it also has to do with what we declare as boundaries of a system, right? So the system is, I mean, in engineering, I mean, we know what we're talking about, because we actually claim that we have a system which is a closed system, right? There is nothing, there is no exchange whatsoever, right? And probably we are able to sort of control sort of material exchanges, and probably we are able to control electromagnetical kind of exchanges. But I think we are fooling ourselves if we claim that we have a closed system, and totally ignoring the fact that there might be an information exchange which we don't even recognize.
Exactly, I totally agree. There is a very permeable barrier. We can put an impermeable barrier in a certain context, but we are absolutely fooling ourselves if we think that everything is repeatable. Like everything, I think, Carsten, depending on how you use it, it can be a curse or a blessing. And this repeatability thing is a prime example. If you're, trying to design or engineer a new drug, I mean, there has to be some repeatability. But who do you repeat it on? I mean, you can't have exactly the same type, and then you have statistics and all the rest of it. So it's vital in its context, but out of context, repeatability is meaningless.
Yes.
Completely meaningless.
But we make ourselves so dependent on that. In the context of science, right? I mean, again, I think if we talk about expanding or extending the sort of the boundaries of our understanding, right? I think we probably need to also question whether this prerequisite of repeatability, whether this is really serving us in this context.
Well, yes, we need a scholarly paper showing where repeatability matters and where it doesn't.
Oh yeah, true. Which is the same along the same lines of objective and subjective kind of experience.
Yes. But a related topic is consilience, the word used by E.O. Wilson, that you don't have repeatable results, but you have independent or semi-independent different things that add up to a body of evidence, whereas each individual piece of that jigsaw is weak evidence, but coming from various angles, it adds up to a body of evidence.
This is so funny. It is so positive. I mean, funny is absolutely the wrong word for this context, but it is remarkable that you mention consilience, because I'm very certain that you're also familiar with the SSE, the Society of Scientific Exploration.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah.
And so you probably also know Bill Bankston, the president. I was together with Bill and two other kind of fellows. We were organizing the annual conference, the last annual conference, which happened in sort of in a face-to-face fashion prior to COVID. That was 2019. In Boulder, in Colorado, and that conference we have put under the headline of consilience. So that it was exactly along these lines, because as you're saying, right, if you have this limited sort of expert but still silo perspective, right?
Yes.
You obviously make sense of your findings within your respective silo.
Yeah.
But that silo on its own might only, as you say, present a weaker part of the evidence. But if you then look at that insight, and then another perspective, and yet another perspective, and you consolidate this on a higher level. Sometimes I'm talking about, like in IT, like an integration bus, right? It's like a bus system where you plug in the various kind of scientific silos into that bus, but then that level, that integration level, basically serves the purpose of identifying the underlying consilience. Right? And I think that level is then also the level which enables us to communicate about the findings. Because if you just look at the various silos, it's probably not tangible enough to communicate it, right? But only if once you have made the effort to sort of drive the consilient perspective, then you have got a result which is actually be tangible enough to communicate.
Yes. To the right person.
To the right person, yeah. That brings us back to what we've said before.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
This is lovely. I think we might probably just want to come to an end. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a natural point to taper off.
Yes.
Really delighted talking to you, and a resonance of like-minded souls, if I can put it that, mixing metaphors here.
Yeah, no, this is perfect, and I can only.
I really think if our intention is right, things will happen in their time.
Well. Yeah, I do so as well, and that is why I follow this impulse to say, why not having these conversations with like-minded people, right, and have them recorded, and again, it might be that that we put them up there, and probably no one else is going to listen to that. Fair enough.
The right one person might.
And that's the point. So for me, it's not a numbers game. For me, it's not quantity, but quality.
It is quality. It is really sending a signal out from a transmitting station.
Yes.
For the right radio receiver to pick it up.
There are no better closing words.
Oh, thank you. As you see, I like analogy and metaphor, because words are very poor, linear, use of words.
And they land so much easier, and they are so much more rememberable.
And can be taken in different levels.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So another, I think, just one more, mythology and symbolism, I think, are very important areas to introduce into the wider Galileo conversation.
Yes, totally. And I think, if just sort of reflecting of what I've been doing over the last sort of decade, because it's now 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, that I left my executive role. But I think how I spent my time over these last 10 years was actually really having these, sort of learning and following my due diligence kind of ambition. But as a side effect, what I experience is that I've become more eloquent talk about these things and to become
That's wonderful.
to test more metaphors. And
Yes.
I mean, and I think that then makes it easier for people to follow,
To communicate.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Great.
So on that token, I think
we'll see you at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, we see each other anyhow, and we will probably just at some point pick up our conversation, right? That would be really lovely.
And meet in person.
Oh yeah, we will do this as
certainly.
Well.
That provides another dimension.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
All the very best.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you for suggesting, Carsten.
Yeah.
See you later.
See you later. Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.
Worldview-Agility podcast. Thank you very much for staying with us. As usual, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please feel free to recommend our podcast to others as well. You can find all of our episodes on www.worldview-agility.com. Again, many thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again soon. All the best, yours, Carsten Ohrmann.